What's up guys, Matty here. In today's video, I'm going to show you 4 different tips on how to get your live drums sounding way more professional. Before we do get started, if you do need your drums mixed and mastered, make sure to check me out at mixandmastermysong.com. You can also find my vocal presets there, which we have for plugin alliance, waves, FabFilter, and more. Let's go. All right guys, so first and foremost, you have to have a good recording. Now, I know that sounds like a cop-out, but it is very true. If you don't have a good drum recording or a good drummer, it's going to be hard to get a good drum sound. I know most of us are recording everything at home now, but if you were to go to the studio to do one thing, I would highly suggest it be recording the drums. It can make such a big difference on how your record's going to sound at the end. I can't overstate how important it is. You can also go on websites like SoundBetter and have someone professionally record the drums for you if all you have is like, a Superior Drummer or something. Doing that can actually really help elevate your record as well. All right, so now that we have our drums professionally recorded, let's talk about panning. Now, there's 2 ways to pan a drum set. There's drummer's perspective, and then there's audience perspective. Drummer's perspective is with a hi-hat, as if you're sitting at the drum set yourself. So the hi-hat's on your right, and the snare's here, and you're playing the drum set, right? That's drummer's perspective. Audience perspective is if you're looking at the drummer. And so if you're looking at the drummer, the hi-hat's actually on the right, and the ride is on the left. So this is very important to distinguish which way you're gonna mix the drums. It depends like what side you're gonna pan the hi-hat, where you're gonna pan the toms, where the overheads and the room mics are gonna go. So all that is very important when you're talking about panning. Let's check out some of these drum files. This is from a song by Le Rebel called Bye Bye Mon Cowboy. You can check them out on Spotify and Apple Music. Great band. Had a great time mixing it. Let's first check out the overheads, right? So you have overhead left and overhead right. This is the way they actually sent them. So let's take a listen just to these solos so we can hear where the hi-hat is. All right, so by listening, we can tell that they have recorded it audience perspective. The hi-hat is over here, so I'm looking at the drummer and the hi-hat's over there. Same with the room mics. You can solo the room mics and it's going to be the same thing. You can hear the hi-hat's over there, the drummer's over there, right? So a lot of times the recording will dictate which way you're going to pan it, but it doesn't mean you can't switch it. I am a stickler for always switching people's panning because I'm a drummer. I grew up as a drummer, and mixing, I just have to have it in drummer's perspective. So what you can do, and it's totally up to you, is switch these around. So switch the left to the right and the right to the left. And now when we solo it, it will sound like drummer's perspective. So let's plan like we're going to do that for the whole record, right? So we're going to switch our rooms around so they're left and right. And then we will put our hi-hat mic to our right, to our left, sorry, just usually around 42, like halfway panned is the way I like to do it. So now our drums will be correctly panned to be drummer's perspective. The last thing we would have to do is the toms. Now, usually the tom 1 is here, tom 2 might be here, and then your floor tom. So you're gonna pan your tom 1, like the 48. Tom 2 can be in the middle, or sometimes I put it slightly right. And then your floor tom, I always crank it all the way to the right because I really wanna hear the toms move around the speakers when they're hit. All right, so next let's talk about phase. Phase is very important when it comes to drums. You are recording something with tons of different mics, and when 2 mics are pointed at each other, they can cancel each other out and do very strange things like lose a lot of low end to the signal. So it's something you really need to check on all your drum mics before you get too deep into the mix. For instance, let's check out this kick. We have kick in and kick out. So one's in the kick drum and one is out of the kick drum. And so what you want to do is solo both of them and just play it and then open. I always use SSL channels on drums. It's just, I might not use them all, but there's always like a phase button and some quick EQs and compressors if you need it. Really great way to just have a bunch of tools ready to go on a drum set. And so let's just play this kick and then we'll hit the kick phase in and out on the kick in. It doesn't matter. You can do the kick in or the kick out and just hear what it's doing to the signal. Okay, so it doesn't sound like there's many phase issues with this kick, so that's a good thing. A lot of times what you would hear is if they were out of phase, when you hit the phase button, suddenly the low end would come in way stronger, okay? Another way to tell if something's out of phase is if it sounds this kind of way far out of the speakers. Let me show you. If we go over to the overheads, right? Let's solo these, and then I'll hit the phase on this, and you'll hear what I mean. They're in phase. I'm gonna flip them out of phase. So you notice they just kind of went way out, and we lost a bit of the low end. So that's a really telltale sign on how to fix phases. One last thing, sometimes just flipping the phase won't fix the issue, and you'll need to dive a little deeper. I like to use this Little Labs plugin. UAD makes it. It's a phase plugin, and you can adjust the phase. So when you just hit the phase button, it's just flipping it 180 degrees. This way, if you use this, you can adjust the phase in smaller increments, and there's a couple different options. You can check it out on their website, but this can be super helpful. If it's still sounding off, even after you hit the phase, you can dial it in a little bit more with this tool. All right, so the next tip is adding samples to your drums. I do this on 99.9% of my mixes. It can just really elevate a recording to the next level. And so I'll usually do it on kicks and snares. And then if it's a bad recording or the toms just aren't working, I'll resample the toms too. And so it's really easy to do that. For this, I use Slate's Trigger. So let's take a listen to this snare. It's pretty good, but we're not getting much snap out of it. So what I'll do is I'll just duplicate the track, duplicate the audio file as well, and then open Trigger. And now you just hit browse. Now you'll need your own samples. I have a ton loaded in. Trigger comes with a lot of good samples. I tend to use a lot of these CLA ones. These ones you actually have to purchase, but let's just grab snare 1, and it will load a bunch of samples ready for you to go. And then you just hit play and get your level. And there it is. And now bring it back in with the other snare, and let's blend it in. Like, you hear how big of a difference that makes when you mute it. Now, another thing, going back to the phase, is when you start loading samples in, you also need to make sure that they're in phase with the current real snare drum. So, you know, you can just solo this out, solo both of these. And there doesn't seem to be an issue there. So you always got to make sure. Also, within Trigger, you can always flip the phase. So if you have like 3 or 4 samples, this one is just like a bunch of samples together, but with room mics and stuff. So it's not like 3 or 4 different samples from different places. But within Trigger, you can actually flip the phase of each sample, which you'll sometimes have to do. If you have, 3 different sounds, you might have to flip the phase of 2 of them and leave 1 regular. So just keep that in mind when you're adding samples, to be very aware of what's going on with your phase. The last tip I want to talk about is parallel compression. This can be a great way to add some punch and energy to your drum set sound. I like to do this after everything's mixed. So, you get your samples and your panning and EQ and compression all right, have the drum sound really good, and then I bring the parallel compression in towards the end of that process. I also like to add the parallel compression when I get some other elements in, because it can lengthen or, add more punch to different parts of the drum set. And I like to hear that with, some guitars and bass going on as well. I run my parallel compressors through Studio Rack because I can have a couple different ones ready to go and just turn them up and, get it cooking. This one I have a Mic DSP one, and then the Omnipressor from Eventide. So let me just play the drums, and I'll bring them in, and you guys can hear what it's bringing to the table. So you can hear it actually extends the snare drum a little bit and just gives a little bit more punch. One thing to note is sometimes I'll just have this going to the kick and snare and not the cymbals. On this instance, we just have it on everything, but maybe 5 times out of 10 is just the kicks and snares as opposed to everything. Now let's switch to the Omnipressor. This is a cool compressor for this. It can really extend the drums and just brings the energy up in a cool way. Less is more with this one. But let me turn it on so you guys can hear it. You hear how that snare is just rolling, rah, rah. It sounds cool. That one, you really want to make sure you got the other instruments in before you bring it in, because it can really change the whole feel. And sometimes just a little bit of that will just make the drums stand out a little bit more and can really help the final mix. All right, guys, so those are my tips on mixing live drums. Hopefully some of this was helpful for you. If you got any tips for me, leave them in the comments below. If you do need your song mixed or mastered, hit me up at mixandmastermysong.com. And once again, you can find my vocal presets there as well. Talk to you soon.